Have you ever felt something inside you begin to change for no apparent reason? As if life, which once seemed sufficient, suddenly became too small. Most people think this is a crisis, weakness, or even madness. But the truth, and here I'll be blunt, is that these signs aren't defects, they're invitations, silent invitations that only appear when the soul is ready. Carl Jung said that the unconscious has its own language, and when it begins to move, no matter how much the ego struggles, the transformation is already underway. The most provocative thing is that these signs arrive in disguise. A strange emptiness you can't explain, accidental encounters that seem written in destiny, social masks that begin to suffocate. Even old dreams returning with messages you'd rather ignore. It seems like chaos, but it's code. It's the self calling you out of your persona and pushing you straight into shadow work. And like it or not, once these signs appear, there's no unseeing them. The reward? An almost brutal clarity about who you are and what truly matters. But this clarity comes with discomfort because the price of seeing is no longer being able to live as before. Few accept this. Most prefer to go back to sleep, pretend nothing happened, hide in the same empty routines. But if you're here, it's because you know ignoring is no longer an option. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't a self-help manual, nor an easy promise. It's a symbolic, psychological, and spiritual map. These are signs that only appear when your soul has decided you can no longer deceive yourself. And if these signs have already knocked on your door, you'll understand there's no turning back. The silent call you feel, but can't explain. There are times when life seems to be following its normal course, but something inside you begins to whisper, like an ancient voice, hard to ignore. This silent call comes with no instruction manual or guarantees. It manifests as restlessness, as if the ego, accustomed to controlling the narrative, momentarily loses its lead. Carl Jung said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and often this call is precisely the first spark of a deeper spiritual process. It's like an invitation hidden in the details of everyday life, a different perspective on the same streets, a strange sensation when faced with people who previously seemed ordinary. Think, for example, of that moment when you're stuck in traffic and suddenly realize that life can't be just this. Wake up, work, come back, sleep. This discomfort may seem banal, but it's a sign that the persona, the mask you wear to survive socially, is no longer sustaining the same narrative. The silent call breaks the autopilot. It's almost as if the universe is saying, hey, there's something else in there that needs to be seen. This discomfort, if you pay attention, is the same one that has driven brilliant minds throughout history to question the obvious and consequently discover new realities. It's not uncommon for this call to arise in simple situations, in the silence before bed, in a song that plays out of nowhere and provokes tears for no apparent reason, or even in a trivial conversation that sparks profound questions. The curious thing is that most people ignore this impulse, choosing to drown the feeling in social media, commitments, and external noise. But those who choose to listen to this whisper open the door to shadow work, a delve into inner regions that have long been neglected. This is the moment when forgotten archetypes begin to stir in the unconscious, demanding entry into consciousness. A practical example, have you ever noticed how some people radically change course after a personal crisis? Suddenly, an executive quits their job to paint, or someone decides to abandon a stable career to live a life of traveling. These changes are rarely the result of reason alone. They arise from this silent calling, from this feeling that ordinary life no longer suffices for what pulses within. If you feel this way, perhaps it's not madness, but rather a genuine movement of the soul asking for expansion. Reading authors like Jung, Joseph Campbell, or even ancient spiritual texts can help translate this hidden language. This silent call isn't an order, but an invitation. It doesn't shout, it simply insists with an almost irritating patience. Ignoring it might work for a while, but sooner or later it returns, ever stronger. It's like a shadow that won't disappear, even when you pretend not to see it. And the more you try to rationalize it, the more you realize there's no logic enough to explain it. That's the point. It's not about logic, but about spirituality. And when that first whisper settles, it's common for something new to begin to be born within, making room for the strange emptiness that arises before all transformation. The strange emptiness that appears before every transformation. Immediately after the silent call, many hope to find clear answers, but what comes is the opposite, a disconcerting emptiness. It's as if everything that once made sense, plans, titles, even relationships, suddenly loses its luster. This emptiness isn't a mistake, nor a punishment, but the gap between an old version of you and the new one that hasn't yet revealed itself. Carl Jung described this space as a fertile territory of the unconscious, where the ego no longer has as much control and spirituality begins to infiltrate. Discomfort arises because the persona, accustomed to giving quick answers, finds itself without a script, and this is frightening. This emptiness can manifest itself in physical and emotional sensations, lack of motivation, inexplicable fatigue, even a certain apathy toward what was once pleasurable. Imagine someone who always loved their job, but suddenly wakes up with no desire to get out of bed, or someone who always sought parties and noise, but begins to feel a strange taste for silence. These changes are not signs of weakness, but of transition. The ego tries to resist, but the psyche already signals that a new cycle is about to begin. Spirituality, at this point, presents itself as an invisible force that reorganizes everything, even if you don't understand it. Virtually all major human transformations involve this moment of suspension. Think of a caterpillar before becoming a butterfly. In the cocoon, it literally dissolves before being reborn. This in-between state is uncomfortable, but inevitable. In practical life, it can be the period when you feel like you've lost your way. You no longer fit into the past, nor are you yet clear about the future. Shadow work intensifies here because old pains, beliefs, and misaligned archetypes emerge. And most importantly, this void is precisely the terrain where individuation begins to take its first steps. If you find yourself in this void, there are practices that can help you navigate it without getting lost. Writing daily, for example, acts as a mirror to organize the fragments that emerge. Reading Carl Jung's The Red Book can be a revealing yet challenging experience. Meditation, especially those that involve deep breathing, help quiet the mind that insists on finding logical answers. And even simple activities, like walking alone in nature, serve as a symbolic ritual to remind you that silence and nothingness are also essential parts of the soul's creative process. This void, paradoxically, is not absence, but a psychic womb. It is here that archetypes reorganize and new narratives begin to form. The problem is that most people try to fill it with distractions, social media, shopping, food, superficial relationships. But the more they try to fill the hole, the deeper it seems. It is precisely when you accept this not knowing that something unexpected begins to happen. Synchronicities increase, signs multiply, and strange encounters begin to emerge. Encounters that seem to have been written in destiny long before you realized it. The accidental encounters that seem to have been written in destiny after the void, situations begin to arise that defy logic. You meet someone who says exactly what you needed to hear. A book literally falls off the shelf, and upon opening it, you're on the page that answers an old question. A random conversation with a stranger becomes a turning point. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, significant events that can't be explained by mere chance. The ego, of course, tries to rationalize, but deep down, you sense something greater aligning the dots. It's as if spirituality uses the external world to provide clues to your inner path. These accidental encounters have the power to change entire paths. How many people have met a life partner in a supermarket checkout line, or received a job offer just when they were about to give up? The curious thing is that the more you open yourself to this flow, the more frequent these events seem to become. It's as if the archetypes of the collective unconscious begin to shift, placing in your path something that reflects what you were already prepared to see. What seemed like coincidence begins to reveal itself as a hidden web of meaning. A practical example. You decide to start shadow work, but you don't know where to begin. Suddenly, someone recommends a book to you unpretentiously, without knowing anything about your current situation. Upon opening it, you find a passage that describes your life with frightening precision. This isn't just luck, it's the unconscious bringing to the surface, through external symbols, what was already ready to be seen within you. Life, at this stage, functions like a mirror. It shows on the outside what you haven't yet been able to name on the inside. These encounters can also be challenging. Sometimes the person who shows up doesn't bring answers, but discomfort. It could be a colleague who arouses envy, a partner who triggers your wound of rejection, or a boss who embodies the authoritarian figure you need to confront. Jung reminded us that not only are good encounters meaningful, the difficult ones are also teachers. Spirituality at this point isn't committed to pleasing you, but to transforming you. It's as if destiny is less about immediate happiness and more about expanding consciousness. The fascinating thing is realizing that these encounters can't be forced. They arise when you're at the exact point of receiving the learning. After all, if they arrived earlier, they would go unnoticed. And if they arrived later, they would no longer make sense. It's a perfect synchronicity that defies even Cartesian logic. Those who surrender to this flow begin to notice that every glance, every coincidence, every person carries a message. And the more you accept this, the clearer it becomes that the social masks, so carefully constructed, can no longer support the density of these revelations. That's when their weight begins to suffocate. The weight of social masks is starting to suffocate. At some point, the persona that once worked so well begins to crack. That mask you donned to please, to be accepted, to fit in, suddenly becomes too heavy. Carl Jung said the persona is necessary, but dangerous when we believe it's all we're made of. What once felt like protection becomes a prison. You smile at work when inside you're screaming, praise someone you secretly despise, pretend to be happy in a relationship that's no longer breathing. This social drama, sustained for years, begins to take its toll. Anxiety, fatigue, even psychosomatic illnesses. The ego tries to hold on, but the body betrays it. This suffocation manifests itself in the details. It's the feeling of leaving a meeting exhausted, not because of the content, but because of the effort to maintain an image. It's the emptiness that arises when returning home after a dinner where you weren't yourself for even a minute. It's the tightness in your chest when you post a smiling photo on Instagram, knowing it doesn't reflect your true state. Spirituality at this point works like a magnifying glass. You begin to perceive more clearly where you're living for others and where your essence demands entry. The suffocation of masks doesn't just happen at the individual level. We live in entire societies sustained by conventions and appearances. Deep down, everyone knows that much of what's on display is performance, but few have the courage to tear up the costume. Jung reminded us that the price of living solely in the persona is losing touch with the self, and this separation creates a malaise that's difficult to explain. It's like trying to run in clothes 3 sizes too small. You can move, but every step is a drag. Sooner or later, you ask yourself, who would I be without this costume? In practice, this questioning can lead to bold moves, people abandoning high-profile careers to pursue something more authentic, relationships ending because finally someone had the courage to admit that love no longer existed, only the appearance of it. It's the moment when you realize that pleasing everyone is impossible and that pleasing yourself may be the only path to true dignity. A useful exercise is to ask yourself, if I didn't need anyone's approval, what would I do tomorrow? This simple reflection already shows how much weight the mask carries, and as this weight increases, the signals from the unconscious intensify. Dreams, which previously went unnoticed, regain strength, revealing truths that wakefulness insists on hiding. They return with symbolic images, full of archetypes and messages, as if to guide you beyond the suffocating persona. It is at this moment that sleep ceases to be merely rest and becomes a stage for psychic revelations. The return of dreams that reveal forgotten truths. The return of dreams that reveal forgotten truths. When masks begin to suffocate, dreams resurface like relentless messengers. What the ego repressed during the day finds freedom in the unconscious to manifest at night. Carl Jung saw dreams as personal letters written by the soul, full of symbols, metaphors, and archetypes. It's no wonder that in moments of crisis or spiritual transition, they return with greater intensity. You dream of unfamiliar houses, impossible journeys, enigmatic figures that seem familiar. Every detail carries a message. Spirituality infiltrates sleep, as if to say, if you don't hear me awake, you'll hear me asleep. These dreams often lack the clarity we'd like. They're laden with strangeness, but they evoke strong sensations. A nightmare, for example, may not simply be the result of fear, but an invitation from the shadow to look at what you've avoided your entire life. Jung called this dream shadow work. A process in which the rejected elements of the ego disguise themselves as images, asking for integration. Are you running away from someone in your dream? Perhaps you're running away from yourself. Are you falling from a high place? Perhaps it's the ego crumbling to make room for the self. In practice, this feedback can be used as a tool for transformation. Keeping a dream journal is a simple yet powerful exercise. By writing down every detail upon waking, colors, emotions, speech, you begin to notice patterns. Symbols often recur: doors, animals, rivers, authority figures. These are all archetypes that the unconscious chooses to communicate truths. Reading works like Carl Jung's man and his symbols can further broaden your understanding of these messages. And the more attention you pay to them, the more the unconscious responds, expanding the symbolic richness of dreams. Many report transformative experiences by following the clues given in dreams. One person dreams repeatedly about water, decides to learn swimming, and discovers not just a sport, but a living metaphor for dealing with their own emotions. Another constantly dreams about a specific animal, researches its archetype, and finds insights that change the way they relate to their own energy. Spirituality here is not theoretical, it is practical, concrete, almost pedagogical. The dream is the teacher using images instead of words, but the return of dreams doesn't just reveal hidden truths, it also confronts the restlessness that creeps into waking life. After intense nights, you wake up with the feeling that something needs to change, even without knowing exactly what. It's the unconscious preparing the ground for the next stage, that nagging restlessness with a life that once seemed sufficient, but now no longer serves. The restlessness with the life that once seemed enough. There comes a time when everything that once sustained your routine loses its color. The work that once brought you pride, the relationship that seemed stable, even the hobbies that once brought you pleasure begin to ring hollow. This restlessness isn't pettiness nor ingratitude, but a sign that the psyche is asking for more. Carl Jung said that life wouldn't bear meaning in the ego alone. Sooner or later, the self demands space. It's as if spirituality knocks on the door, reminding you that you can't live forever in rehearsed roles. What seemed sufficient suddenly becomes a gilded prison, comfortable but limiting. This restlessness manifests itself persistently. You go to work and feel like you're just going through the motions. You go to social gatherings and, amidst the laughter, feel a piercing loneliness. You turn on the TV, open social media, but nothing fills you. Your ego tries to rationalize. I have everything. I should be happy. But your heart insists, that's not it. It's at this point that many people experience crisis because they realize that external parameters, status, money, appearance, are no longer enough. It's as if the soul is demanding authenticity, and the persona, accustomed to pleasing, doesn't know how to cope. In practice, this restlessness can lead to ruptures, people leaving seemingly perfect jobs to start from scratch in another field. Couples ending long-term relationships because they realize the love no longer exists, only the memory of it. Individuals moving to another city, another country, or even immersing themselves in spiritual retreats in search of something that everyday life no longer offers. This movement may seem crazy to outsiders, but for those who feel it, it's a matter of psychic survival. It's at this point that the shadow, previously ignored, begins to manifest itself with greater force. A simple example. Someone who has always been the good guy in the family, the one who never causes problems, suddenly explodes in the face of a trivial situation. This outburst of anger doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the accumulated shadow, demanding space. Another case, a person who has always defined themselves by their work begins to experience anxiety attacks, as if their body was screaming, "I'm not just this." Jung explained that individuation involves precisely this discomfort, allowing what was hidden to come to the surface. Spirituality at this point is not peace, but confrontation. This restlessness, however uncomfortable, is the prelude to something greater. It dismantles illusions, reveals the fragility of certainties, and pushes you inward. What once seemed sufficient no longer supports the weight of your expanding soul. And when you accept this discomfort without running away, you discover that it is merely a harbinger of the next stage, the shadow appearing in unexpected ways, demanding integration. A shadow appearing in unexpected ways to be integrated. When restlessness can no longer be suppressed, the shadow begins to show clearer signs. It emerges where you least expect it, in disproportionate anger, in unacknowledged envy, in seemingly unfounded sadness. Carl Jung said that the shadow is everything the ego rejects and hides, but which never disappears. On the contrary, it disguises itself, projects itself onto others, returns in dreams, or even in the body, through psychosomatic illnesses. The curious thing is that it doesn't appear to destroy you, but to be integrated, like a forgotten part of the soul knocking at the door. These manifestations can be disturbing. A simple example, that calm person known for their patience suddenly explodes in a fit of rage. Or someone always altruistic who in an unexpected moment reveals themselves to be selfish, surprising themselves. These outbursts are not character errors, but glimpses of the shadow trying to reveal itself. Spirituality at this point presents itself not as a soft light, but as an uncomfortable glare, revealing what was hidden. The ego is frightened, but the psyche knows that without integrating these parts, there is no true individuation. In practice, dealing with the shadow requires courage and the right tools. Shadow work is one of them. Writing about forbidden feelings, reflecting on people you intensely judge, or observing recurring patterns in your relationships can yield powerful insights. When you ask yourself, what does this person awaken in me that I don't accept? You're already opening space to integrate a fragment of the shadow. Reading works like Carl Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections, or even studying contemporary authors like Robert A. Johnson can help translate the symbolic language of these manifestations. An important detail, the shadow isn't just integrated into silence or meditation, but also into everyday relationships. How many times have you judged someone as arrogant, only to realize later that it was your own arrogance mirrored, or projected fragility onto someone when in fact it was your vulnerability that needed acknowledgement? These human mirrors are precious opportunities. They reveal what you insist on denying, but which needs to be seen for the soul to breathe. The process is uncomfortable but liberating. As the shadow appears and begins to be embraced, something curious happens. A natural impulse arises to distance oneself from superficial people and environments. What was once tolerable becomes unbearable. Empty conversations tire, relationships of convenience lose their meaning, and the heart craves more silence and depth. This distancing isn't arrogance, but an instinctive choice of the soul, which can no longer bear wasting time with masks that don't align with the new path. The urge to move away from superficial people and environments. Once the shadow begins to reveal itself, social life undergoes an inevitable filter. What was once bearable, petty gossip, trivial conversations, relationships of convenience, suddenly becomes too much. It's as if the soul can no longer maintain itself in these places without feeling suffocated. Carl Jung said that individuation requires the courage to differentiate oneself, even at the risk of loneliness. This impulse to withdraw is not born of contempt, but of the need to preserve psychic energy. Spirituality here does not call for eternal isolation, but for a conscious selection of what truly nourishes. In practice, this can manifest itself in subtle ways. You start declining invitations to parties that don't speak to you. You start to feel uncomfortable in groups where everyone is competing to be seen, or you lose interest in relationships that revolve around superficialities. Your ego tries to resist. After all, it fears rejection, but something deeper demands silence and truth. This distancing is the first step toward creating an internal space where new seeds can germinate. It's the difference between eating emotional fast food every day and finally seeking nourishment that truly sustains you. This movement can be frightening. Friends and family often interpret it as coldness or selfishness, but distancing yourself doesn't mean a lack of love. On the contrary, it's a way of respecting yourself so you can then give of yourself authentically. A clear example, someone who has always been a shoulder to cry on starts saying no to requests for help that only drain their energy. At first, it seems cruel, but over time it reveals itself as self-care. Jung reminded us that one cannot save the world by carrying an exhausted persona. One must first align with the self. To get through this phase, simple practices can help. Reducing time spent on social media, for example, opens space for real connections. Seeking out environments that resonate with your spirituality, meditation groups, study circles, even reading communities about Jung and related authors can replace superficial interactions with nourishing encounters. Even walking alone in parks or sitting in silence with a coffee can become a spiritual act when you choose to be present with yourself, rather than getting lost in external noise. And as this separation unfolds, something new begins to unfold. A strange but comforting feeling that you're not truly alone. It's as if an invisible force is guiding every step, weaving together encounters, creating opportunities, sustaining you when fear threatens to overwhelm you. What felt like isolation becomes preparation, because soon the realization dawns that something greater is guiding the way, as if life holds a secret script waiting to be discovered. The feeling that something bigger is guiding every step, it is at this point that the journey takes on a new texture. After the separation, silence gives way to a different perception. The feeling that one is no longer walking alone. Coincidences become messages, unlikely choices prove to be right, unlikely paths open up. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, the mysterious encounter between the inner world and external events. The ego, accustomed to believing it controls everything, begins to bow before something greater. Spirituality here appears not as a distant theory, but as a palpable experience, almost impossible to deny. In practice, this feeling arises in simple ways. You think of someone, and suddenly they call. You feel lost about a decision, open a random book, and the answer is there. A path that seemed closed suddenly opens wide, without rational explanation. It's as if archetypes of the collective unconscious move pieces on the invisible chessboard of life. The curious thing is that the more you trust, the more these signals multiply. It's as if the universe tests your faith with small nudges, waiting to see if you'll still doubt. But this feeling also challenges the ego, because believing that something greater is guiding you means admitting that you don't have absolute control. For some, this brings relief. For others, fear. A practical example. Someone who planned their career perfectly sees everything fall apart, only to discover, months later, that the fall opened doors to a life more aligned with the self. Another example. An unexpected move to another city that at first seems like a tragedy, but later reveals itself as an encounter with transformative people and experiences. Spirituality, in this sense, doesn't obey comfort, but expansion. To cultivate this trust, small rituals can help. Keeping a synchronicity notebook, for example, where you record significant coincidences, allows you to notice invisible patterns that would otherwise go unnoticed. Practicing gratitude, even on difficult days, strengthens the bond with this greater force. Reading stories of great transformations, from Greek tragedies to modern tales of overcoming adversity, shows that this invisible thread has always been present. Carl Jung said that life has a broader plan than the ego can see, and that the self knows the path long before the mind accepts it. And when this realization truly sets in, an internal shift occurs. Courage arises without warning, as if breathed from within. Suddenly, you act without understanding where such strength comes from. The fear remains, but it no longer paralyzes you. It's as if an invisible ally walks beside you, reminding you that each step is already supported by something greater. This mysterious courage doesn't come from outside, but springs forth as an inner calling you can no longer ignore. And it is precisely this courage that paves the way for the next stage of your journey. The mysterious courage that arises in you for no apparent reason. Suddenly, without warning, an unexpected strength surges within you. It's not trained courage, nor the result of planning. It's as if a silent flame is lit in your heart, burning away old doubts. Carl Jung said that when the self begins to emerge, psychic energy reorganizes, and this generates an almost irrational confidence. It's strange. You still feel fear, but at the same time you act as if something greater is holding your hands. Spirituality manifests in this sudden boldness, as if the soul is saying, now is the time. This mysterious courage doesn't come when you're ready, but precisely when you believe yourself to be most fragile. It's in the midst of a crisis, when the ego is exhausted and the persona no longer maintains appearances, that this strength emerges. People who always saw themselves as shy suddenly find themselves able to say no. Those who have always avoided conflict suddenly face what needs to be faced. It's as if the shadow, once integrated, releases energy pent up for years. What seemed like weakness reveals itself as hidden strength, just waiting for the chance to emerge. In practice, this can be observed in both ordinary and extraordinary stories. A mother who, without ever having defense training, finds superhuman strength to protect her son. A student who, despite being discredited, decides to take a public exam and passes against all odds. A patient who receives a difficult diagnosis but, instead of giving up, discovers a determination he never knew he possessed. This mysterious courage is living proof that the psyche holds reserves unknown to the ego and which only reveal themselves when life demands them. But this courage isn't just for big things. It also manifests itself in small acts of authenticity. Raising your voice in a meeting to say what you really think, ending a relationship that no longer serves you, even if it hurts. Choosing yourself instead of bending to the desires of others. Each of these gestures seems simple, but carries enormous symbolic weight. It's proof that spirituality isn't distant, but in everyday life, and that individuation doesn't happen only in long meditations, but in practical decisions, in which the self finally takes the helm. The curious thing is that this courage doesn't run out. On the contrary, the more you exercise it, the more it grows. It's like an invisible muscle, strengthened each time you use it. And even without knowing how to explain it, you realize that this strength isn't just yours. It seems to come from a greater place, a flow that sustains all who dare to traverse the unknown. It's this courage that closes the cycle and at the same time opens another, because deep down each stage of awakening is just the beginning of a new journey. Now that you recognize the signs, the inevitable question is, what will you do with them? Will you pretend nothing has changed and continue on autopilot, or will you take responsibility for diving into yourself? Carl Jung reminded us that transformation doesn't happen through what you know, but through what you dare to experience. The ego will always try to negotiate, the persona will always demand applause, but the self demands courage. And courage here doesn't mean not being afraid. It means going through it. It means looking at the shadow without disguise, embracing the dreams that reveal forgotten truths, enduring the void until it transforms into birth. Spirituality isn't anesthesia, it's awakening, and awakening hurts, but it also liberates. So I ask, what masks are you still willing to wear? How many superficial relationships are you still willing to maintain? How long will you accept living a life that doesn't speak to your soul? These questions aren't meant to please me, but to poke at your conscience, because no one can take this step for you. If something here resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share in the comments. Which of these signs have appeared in your life? And above all, don't let this process fade. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with me on this journey, because each video is a piece of this map, and the next one could be exactly what your soul is asking for right now.